Nazir, Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Moeed Pirzada with the continuing transmission on US election with 92 News. We had a marathon long session this afternoon, but at this time, most of the comment was coming from within Pakistan while United States was asleep. Now we have all the four participants. We have key participants right now all across the United States. We'd like to understand the situation from them. The update is this, that five states, swing states, continue to be undecided at the moment, and maybe in the next couple of hours we can actually have a more definitive result about the US presidency. I'm joined right now with Mr. Stephen Payne. Stephen is in Houston. He's been a Washington insider. He has been working with the government of Pakistan over the past 20 years off and on. He recently also joined us in a program yesterday. I'm also joined by Michael Kugelman at the Wilson Center in Washington. He's joining us with the phone line. He's with us for the first 20 minutes. I'm joined by Professor Adil Najm, his dean at the Purdue School at Boston University in Boston. And I'm also joined by Najmuddin Sheikh Sahab, who's the ex-Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. A very warm welcome to all my guests once again. If I can start very quickly with Michael Kugelman. Michael, we have been hearing throughout this day from one after the other analysts that this is not an election in which Joe Biden is an important entity. This is actually an election for and against Donald Trump. I mean, the people that are either voting for Donald Trump or people are voting against Donald Trump. This is an America that is split around Donald Trump. Is this a true characterization?
I think it is a true characterization. It's not the only appropriate characterization, but it is an important one. I do think that on many levels this election is a referendum on the phenomenon of Donald Trump, just because he, of course, has been such an unconventional and such a different type of president from what this country has been used to for many times. Probably one of the more unpredictable presidents in modern U.S. history, not just in terms of his policies, which have been very controversial on many levels, but just his broader philosophical views of, say, how the office of the presidency should be treated and what type of role the U.S. should play in the world. It's just been very different from what we've been used to. So, indeed, I think that this election is a referendum on many things, certainly a number of policy issues, one of them being the pandemic and Trump's handling of it. But I do think that since Trump has been such an unusual, an unconventional and controversial figure who has really exacerbated the long-standing divisiveness and partisanship in this country, indeed, that I do think that this election is very much about him. I mean, it's certainly about Joe Biden as well, just because he offers such a different approach, a different mentality, a different philosophy from Trump. So it's clearly a referendum on two dramatically contrasting views about what the best way is to push this country forward.
Okay, let me bring Stephen Payne into it. Stephen, at almost 2:30 in the morning in the East Coast time, President of the United States Donald Trump almost declared his victory speech and also threatened. He accused the Democrats of doing some sort of election rigging and fraud, and he also threatened that if the vote count didn't start, if it's not finished properly in time, he can go to Supreme Court. Are you expecting that within the next few hours there will be legal challenges from President Donald Trump to the kind of election results that are now emerging in the swing states?
Well, what I can say is what Trump was saying at 2:30 in the morning actually sort of became true. He said he was worried that at 4 a.m. votes would start shifting. Whether there was something nefarious or not is to be debated, of course. But the things did shift. At that time, there's 6 states in play, and 5 of them were in favor of Trump at about 2:30 in the morning. Now, of those 6 states, 3 of them are in favor of Trump, and 3 of them are in favor of Biden. And for him to have any chance, for President Trump to have any chance to win, he has to win 4 of those 6 remaining states. I do think that lawyers are probably mounting a strategy right now, and they will go and probably try to get control of the counting and make sure that it's all being done in a fair and transparent way.
Okay, let me get to Professor Adil Najm. Professor Adil Najm, how can we explain the fact that even in a resourceless country, poor country like Pakistan, once the vote has been put, the vote counting never stops. But in the United States, somehow or the other, after midnight, the vote count stopped. It has resumed only after about 7 a.m. or 7:30 a.m. in the morning, which is very unusual. I mean, in countries like India and Pakistan, once the vote has been cast, the vote counting never stops. And this is what President Trump actually warned against as well. So why do you think it happened? Why this was such a mysterious stopping of the vote count?
Moeed, I don't think there is anything mysterious about it. I think the only mysterious thing was Donald Trump's speech. And if there was an attempt to steal the election, it is the speech and what he might do. There is nothing mysterious about it. U.S. elections are called on that night, but they have never been decided recently until many days, sometimes weeks afterwards, right? So mail-in votes are not new. They come in. And what happens usually is that in the night, the result is clear enough to declare a victor. Right now, all of these are unofficial things. And what happens is that the counting continues. And because that is a normal process, going to sleep is also the normal process. So there is nothing unusual in this except for Donald Trump. And except for the fact that there is an attempt not only to make this election controversial, but to make democracy in the US controversial. I would say the following. I think the results.
But you heard Stephen Payne saying the same thing. But you heard Stephen Payne saying that Trump worried this thing that the results will change in the swing states in the morning.
Obviously, if 50% of 60% of the votes are counted and 40 are not, it is not unlikely, or should not be surprising that results will change when you count the other votes, right? There is nothing unusual about that. If the results were clear, they would have been declared. But the point is, I think the real result has been found, and it's has been announced, and it's a very unfortunate result. The result is that either Trump or Biden, more likely if the votes are actually taken seriously, is going to be president. But the US of tomorrow is going to be more divided than the US of yesterday. Whether Trump is a one-term president or a two-term president, the legacy is that a country is broken. And the country was broken a week ago. And what yesterday did was it has now cemented that break. And it's not just Trump. Frankly, it's not just Trump. The US electorate voted that way. Even if Trump loses, let us suppose that the vote goes out and Trump loses. Even then, the numbers now suggest that Trump already has received more votes than he did in 2016. The US had a very stark choice. This time, Trump was not an ambiguity. There was a very stark choice, and the division of the country is what is clear, not just on that map. But again and again, that map is very interesting because it's a map very similar to 2016. So those who might have thought that Trump was an aberration, I think were proved wrong. I think Trump has proved himself to be a very effective campaigner, his support to be very deep. But that also means that this is an amazingly divided country. We in Pakistan know what divided countries look like, but we cannot recognize the type of division that exists in the United States today.
Would you agree with Professor Adil Najam's characterization that irrespective of whosoever wins, United States politics is tragically split in a very bad fashion? It's a very divided polity.
Right. So I certainly think that the divided society and political scene that we have here in this country was exacerbated in the Trump era, and because of Trump and his policies and what he said and so on. But I think that this notion of divisiveness has been in the U.S. for quite some time. There's been a very hyper-partisan environment for many years. Certainly, it was the case in the Obama era. You go back a number of years, you could argue that some of the divisiveness that you have now was seeded back in 2000, which was the last time you had a seriously contested election. Which eventually went to the Supreme Court over the issue of recounting ballots in Florida. So it's been there for a long time. And certainly, regardless of who wins the election, indeed, I do think that this divisiveness will not go away for quite some time. Unfortunately, I would argue that some of the things that Trump has done has really entrenched a lot of this toxicity and just brought a lot of encouragement on a lot of what had been fringe views to become mainstream views. Many of his supporters, in terms of their views on race and things like that, it's just really toxic. And that, in place, has, I think, amplified the voices of those on the other extreme, on the far left in the country. So certainly, the U.S. has always been a relatively moderate place. But I do think that in the Trump era, these two different fringe groups, so to speak, have become more mainstream. It's going to take a long time to recover from that. And that's not even to talk about the other impacts of the Trump years if he were to lose. What he has done to institutions in this country, the U.S. profile in the world, its reputation, its soft power, which I fear has been not shattered, but it's been undercut in a really big way. So it's going to be a difficult time for this country, regardless of who wins the election. Though certainly, I am happy to see. I mean, the democratic process has really played out to this point. You had huge levels of turnout. We could have the largest turnout in a century, which is remarkable. Everything has gone according to plan so far. There's not been, as I understand it, any violence or unrest, other than a few very isolated issues. But now comes the hard part, where we see if the election is contested by the president, or by Biden for that matter, what happens from there. So, very tense moment, but I am pleased to see the democratic process play out very effectively to this point.
Stay with me. Najmuddin Sheikh Saab, you have been doing foreign policy all your life. Some people have argued throughout the day in our special transmission that the kind of split and the polarization which we see in American politics, Trump is merely a symptom of that. Trump is not necessarily responsible for that, and the United States politics has actually split between the coastal towns and the inner United States in a very major way, and whosoever becomes the president will find it very difficult to heal it now.
I agree with that entirely. What you have is a polarization within the United States, which threatens everything that we associate with the United States and with the checks and balances that theoretically are a large part of maintaining democracy in the United States. Right now, you have a country which is, I think Biden is going to win once the votes are counted, but that's not important. What is important is that it's going to be a 51-49 or a 52-48, which means what? That the country is divided and polarized to the point where President Biden, if that is what the result turns out to be, President Biden will say that I want to be the president for all Americans. But there will be a division which represents the polarization within the country, and that is going to make it very difficult for the United States and the establishment in the United States to be able to suggest that we still have checks and balances. Those checks and balances are going to disappear when you find that the country is divided in this particular fashion. This is terrible for the United States. It's even more terrible. It's equally terrible for the rest of the world. The United States gets a cold, the world gets influenza. This is going to be the position, despite the fact that the importance of the United States on the international stage is declining, but it hasn't declined to the point where it is not the sole superpower today. And the sole example of democracy with its checks and balances in play. Now those are no longer in play. This is one of the tragic results of what you see now.
Let me bring before the break. Let me bring Stephen Payne into it. Stephen, we have been looking into a map for the past 4 years, which has been displayed hundreds of times by CNN and by New York Times, which shows United States 50 states, and we see all red in the center and we see blue on the coastal towns. It's like the large coastal towns like New York, Florida, Boston, California, San Francisco. They are democratic. And the central United States, where you are at the moment, Texas, it's all red. It looks like that the coastal towns are more worldly, more cosmopolitan, more minorities, more part of the world, more people traveling, and the central United States is becoming a different world. Do you agree that this is the kind of split United States now faces?
That's been the split for a while now. They call it the flyover states here is what it's called in the U.S. But I want to bring up something that's really remarkable that did happen yesterday in Starr County here in Texas, which is basically at the very bottom of Texas, right along the Rio Grande River. In 2016, Hillary Clinton got 80% of the vote compared to Trump's 20%. Last night, Joe Biden got 52% and Trump got 47%. That's a 55-point shift. It is unheard of that in one of the bluest, most Democrat places
what does it mean?
in the States. What it means is that the Republican Party has changed, that Hispanics voted in big numbers for Trump. You saw that's what carried him so handily in Miami, and that's what's carrying him in the bluest of blue areas of Texas. So what it means is that the demographic of the two parties is shifting. It's going to take a few weeks to figure out exactly what happened, but I'm also suspecting that the African-American vote shifted dramatically. Now, we're talking about going from 7 or 8% in 2016 to maybe 15 to 18% here. It's still a big majority for the Democrats, but it's a doubling of support for the Republican Party. So things have shifted, and I do agree that with the statements that we are going to have a very divided government here. It looks like the Senate will hold as Republicans, so you'll have a House Democrat. The presidency, I would give the advantage to the former vice president for Biden to win, and then you're going to have a Senate that will remain as essentially a speed bump, if you want to call it that, to keep the administration from going too quickly and making too many changes.
So just a very quick comment from Michael Kugelman, because I know that you would not be with us after the break. Are you seriously expecting there would be a legal confrontation within the next several hours, or you think that the things will settle down? Very quick.
Well, with President Trump, one never knows. And I think that the key is for these all these mail-in ballots in these urban areas of swing states to be voted and to be counted. And Trump knows that those, I think, would be in the Democrats' favor, because he's got a lot of Democratic support in urban areas of the U.S. in this context. And that's where you have to worry that he would try to prevent those from being counted. And that's where you have to worry about him trying to attempt legal challenges. But he wouldn't be able to make a case very easily. So we'll know. I mean, we won't know in the next few hours. It may take another day or two until we know if there's going to be legal challenges. But it certainly is a possibility, more of a chance than at any time since 2000.
Let me take a break. Thank you to all my guests for with me. My panel will be with me after the break as well. Michael Kugelman, thanks for joining us in the first part of this program. See you after the break. Nazir, welcome. From the discussion which we had before the break, it looks like once the dust settles, Joe Biden has a greater chance of emerging as United States president. And this will mostly be because of the fact that the postal ballot and the early ballot is mostly coming out in favor of the Democrats. And will President Trump implement his threat? Will he actually mount a legal challenge to this trend? Remains to be seen. But let's move to another aspect of the discussion, to Professor Adil Najm. Professor Adil Najm, while we had long discussion on the election, one thing that analyst after analyst pointed out is that this election does not have any consequences to Pakistan, for the fact that both parties, Republicans and Democrats, have a bipartisan consensus on India. If you just look at the Baker Agreement, which they just signed with India in the last week of October. So there won't be any change towards Pakistan. The United States is now decisively a strategic ally of India. So do you agree with this, that there will not be any change for Pakistan, or do you think that there will be some kind of change if Joe Biden becomes the US president?
So my view has been the same, Moeed, as what you said, that structurally on the issues themselves, I don't see any daylight. There is, in fact, consensus both between the two people and the two parties. Pakistan is not important to US politics right now. I don't think it will make the first 100 list or even 150 list. It is important, however, because it is linked to things that make that list. So there is an indirect importance. And on that, there is consensus. The style is very different, though. The style is very different.
And what
Trump
is that?
Is a very individual.
What is the indirect importance?
The indirect is, so there are three and maybe 3.5 issues, right? The first and most immediate one is Afghanistan. Pakistan is important because Afghanistan is important, and getting out of Afghanistan is important to America, and therefore Pakistan is needed. And there both parties would want to leave. The second one and the biggest one is China. So whether it is Trump or whether it's Biden, the next 20, 30 years is going to be this superpower rivalry, and essentially the game is going to be, to use the Urdu word, usse kutti karo, and would say, come to me and say no to the other. And that pressure is going to come to Pakistan. I think Pakistan should resist it, both from China and the US. But Pakistan can serve a useful role for the US and China in being, maybe if not a bridge, at least a mode of communication, but that pressure will remain. And India, I think, has got nothing to do with Kamala Harris or so on and so forth. India is the third one, but it's got nothing to do with Pakistan. India is going to be, for, I would say, for the next 20, 25 years, coming increasingly close to the US, simply on the principle that an enemy's enemy is a friend. The US preoccupation is China. India serves a purpose that will bring the US increasingly close to India, and Pakistan will have to find a way of maintaining its own individuality without being sort of lumped with that. The fourth, where I think there might be a difference, is the Middle East. If there is a Trump presidency, then I think you should expect an increased pressure. A second Trump presidency would be like a second Modi term in India, right? No holds barred. Now he's got nothing to lose. All the gloves are off. And especially one of the things that will happen to Pakistan is you will see more pressure on the Middle East and recognizing Israel and moving Pakistan both from the US and maybe Saudi Arabia towards what the UAE, etc., have done. So in that sense, I think Pakistan will, it's not that Pakistan will become unimportant, but I do not see a change. On this one, I think the two parties as well as the two people, the policy goals are the same, the style is very, very different, of course. You know, one operates by tweets, and the other is going to be a far more reliable, maybe not dependable, but reliable. You will know what Washington thinks, and that is what Biden will think.
If I take to Stephen, we in the Pakistan find it very surprising that Indians have never fought a single bullet or a single shot for United States. No Indian has ever died. India hasn't fought a war. India has never been a strategic ally in that sense, the way Pakistan has been in the Cold War, or Pakistan has been against the Soviets in Afghanistan and against an ally in Afghanistan conflict. But yet India is the strategic ally. But Pakistan is not the strategic ally. How do you really explain? I mean, you've been working with government Pakistan, you've been a lobbyist for Pakistan. How do you explain that confusion, that quandary, the contradiction?
Well, I think as the professor said, certainly China does play a role. And assuming that there is a Biden presidency, and again, I would give it odds on that that's the way that the election is going to go over the next couple of days. I think that there will be a softening of relationship with China. You know, Trump is very hard line on China. I think that the Biden administration will try to come back and try to soothe the relationship a bit, which will mean that India will play less of a role going forward, at least as a China buffer. But Pakistan, I think, can play a very, very important role in Afghanistan. I think that there's definitely a desire to pull out of Afghanistan on the U.S. side, and only Pakistan can help fill that void and promote regional security. So I think this is a place where U.S. and Pakistan relations can flourish, and that both sides can benefit greatly from it.
But you being a lobbyist as well, I mean, you understand these things. The Pakistanis are very disappointed that despite the fact that they've been helping US in Afghanistan, US hasn't really helped us, Trump administration, to get out of the FATF grey list, which we think is principally an Indian design.
I can tell you that certainly it is. There was at the FATF meeting, which was on the 21st. There's actually a pre-meeting about 10 days earlier. And I believe that the U.S. and the U.K. each asked about 20 questions of Pakistan, and I think that India asked like 165. So for them, this has become a foreign policy priority, keeping Pakistan on the FATF list. But Pakistan has gone from being non-compliant in 13 issues back in the summer. Now it's down to 6, and I think by the next meeting in February, hopefully it will finally be finished. The U.S. is actually actively trying to help Pakistan come off the list, but They're just one of 39 countries that are part of the FATF process. Of course, the U.S. brings a lot of countries with it, but we don't have complete authority to just simply say this is the way it's got to be. We have to work with other countries, and I know the U.S. is working hard with Pakistan's officials to try to help move things in the right direction.
Moeed, if I
Very
can jump
interesting.
in.
Very interesting comment. Najmuddin Sheikh Saab.
Can I jump in for just
Go ahead
one
very
second?
quickly, then we have to come to Najmuddin Sheikh Saab.
जी Najm साहब से पहले
Yes,
just
quick.
I don't think the US is working very hard. This is a sword over Pakistan's head. If I've been surprised by anything, it is that before the election, the Trump administration didn't deliver on FATF. FATF is blatantly unfair. I think the first thing Pakistan should do, whether it is certainly if it's Biden, but even if it is Trump, is to say FATF or nothing. Let us make that a condition, because it is so blatantly unfair. And I do not believe for a moment that if the US wants Pakistan off the list, it cannot do it. US made a choice, India versus Pakistan in FATF. And I think going forth, use the opportunity of a new president to say, okay, we really want to talk to you, but can you first get FATF cleared, and as soon as you have, we'll pick up your phone.
Najmuddin Sheikh Saab, very quickly before the break.
Well, you know, I was going to say when Stephen said that Billingsley and the United States is going to help to get Pakistan off the FATF list, I said, aapke muh mein ghee shakkar. Lekin unfortunately, I have to agree more with Adil Najam that that's not likely to happen. The fact of the matter is that it isn't that the United States is working towards removing Pakistan from that list. It is much more that the United States feels that that pressure must continue to be maintained. And let me be quite clear. In my view, that pressure is good, because we need to do these things. We need to do these things not because the United States wants them or other people want them, but because it is in our interest. The FATF is by and large, whatever you want to say about the prejudices, etc., the Asia Pacific group, the enhanced surveillance, is something that we should pay heed to. We should pay heed to not because the Americans want it, not because the APG wants it, but because it is in our interest to do so. Second, let us be clear that whether it is Biden or whether it is President Trump who becomes, I'm sure that as this proceeds, President Biden, Vice President Biden is going to be the oldest president in the United States. But that does not change the fact that there is a definite thing with regard to the relationship that it is going to maintain with India. That relationship is not going to change. That relationship is going to be maintained. What you will see, however, by my reckoning, is that of the senior politicians in America, Biden is the one who is most experienced with regard to Afghanistan and Pakistan. He is the one who is most sympathetic, and I use that word deliberately, most sympathetic to understanding Pakistan's dilemma. And he is also aware of the fact that these are two nuclear states between whom a nuclear confrontation is very possible, and that it is in the interest of the United States, in fact, it's the interest of the globe, that this does not go further. So I assume that much more so than President Trump and Pompeo, President Biden will work towards trying to ease the situation between the two countries, which is not to say that he will in any way diminish the results of the 2+2 conferences that have been held. The Quad is going to become a very live issue, and whether we say that India is a false partner in the Quad or etc., this is nonsense. Narendra Modi has sold himself on the proposition that his future lies with the United States. Whether Jai Shankar thinks otherwise is immaterial. Narendra Modi thinks his future lies with this, that Malabar exercises are going to be conducted with the participation of the United States. The Quad is going to proceed further, and we should recognize that particular reality. But we should also recognize that the United States, under Biden, let me emphasize, under Biden will say that that is not enough. And we should recognize that what Kamala Harris has said with regard to Kashmir and what Kamala Harris has said about the persecution of the minorities in India is going to be a telling point in terms of the policy that President Biden follows, or if he becomes president, President Biden follows towards India.
Let me take a break. Stay with me. Stay with me. Let me take a break. I'd also like to understand from Stephen the Kamala Harris, the political identity, because is she more Afro-American or is she more be leaning towards India? I mean, will the ideology be more important or the origins be more important in case of Kamala Harris? But let's take a break. After the break, we continue this discussion. Nazir, welcome back. I only have about 8 minutes to wind up the discussion here. Let me go quickly to Stephen. Stephen, Indian newspapers mentioned that very proudly that Kamala Harris's maternal grandfather was a civil servant, was a senior civil servant, was almost a secretary to the Indian state. Do you think Kamala Harris's political identity is more for human rights and minority and African American, or she will be more leaning towards India because of her ethnic origins?
Well, I think that she'll certainly have some strong opinions with regard to India. It seems to me, just from looking at it from the surface, is that she's very pro-India, but maybe a bit anti-Modi is where she seems to be playing out. But definitely she's going to participate in these decisions. But at the same time, I want to echo what the Foreign Secretary said previously, that this is going to be a very seasoned team that Biden is going to bring on board. I think I have some ideas as to who that's going to be already, and it's going to be a very seasoned team. A lot of the Obama and Clinton people will be coming back onto the scene, and so I don't think that you're going to see huge shifts. In fact, it could be actually an opportunity, like we've intimated here, an opportunity for Pakistan.
Very interesting comment. In what capacity President Obama could be coming back?
No, I said some of President Obama's people, not President Obama, but some of his people will come back into a Biden administration.
President Obama's people will be coming back. So, Professor Adil Najm, do you think Pakistan can continue to play a balancing role if Joe Biden becomes, even Stephen agrees that Joe Biden has a greater chances of emerging as a president. So, do you think that Pakistan can continue to play a balancing role between China and United States the way it played in 1960s and 70s?
I hope it plays some role. I don't think it will be like the 60s, 70s because the conditions were different, and nor should Pakistan, I don't think Pakistan should try to play a very leading role. You know, I've used the word, the Punjabi word, nive. We should keep a low profile and stay as much out of this battle of elephants that is bound to happen. You know, when elephants fight, it's the ants that get trampled. And it is inevitable that the elephants will clash. I hope not violently, but they could be in trade and other things. So yes, I think Pakistan has a role. Pakistan will have a role both for China and for the US. But I don't think it's a role that we should be working too hard to get. I would say, however, on your question, I agree that at this point, every indication is that Biden is likely. But to your very early question, you know, if the results aren't actually accepted in 2 days, this will nearly certainly go to the Supreme Court. And I would be betting that Mr. Trump, being the person he is going to make that because he thinks the Supreme Court owes him. He has put people in there. So I don't think that this is going to be your last program on the US elections, in my sense. And one last comment also on Kamala Harris. I think Stephen is right. Kamala Harris is very ambitious. She tried to be the president of the US. And if she is seen as the Indian in the White House.
She tried to be the president of the US.
She did. I mean, she ran for president, right? She ran for president, and that's how she became the vice presidential candidate. So she's certainly going to want to do that again. And to be seen to be too close to any foreign power, even if it is your ancestral India, is not going to play for her. So she, I think, will in fact very She will be a major voice on India, but she will very clearly want to be creating a politics within the US, particularly on race issues, where there will be a pressure on her as well as for her ambitions.
Najmuddin Sheikh Saab, given the fact that Biden might actually be more flexible towards Iran on JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, because Biden was part of the negotiation, do you see a regional situation changing vis-a-vis Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan?
Oh yes, I definitely see a change. JCPOA is not going to be resurrected in the form that it was. I do not think Biden is going to buy that particular proposition. What he is going to buy is that there must be renegotiation. There must be renegotiation, and there is enough room, in his view. And perhaps Jawad Zarif's statements seem to suggest that there will be a degree of flexibility. Let me say that his public statements say that I will not now be able to talk to the United States until they compensate us for all the hardships that they have created before going back to the JCPOA. But that's the opening gambit. By my view, Rouhani and his representative Jawad Zarif is going to be prepared for a great deal of flexibility on this, and for reopening negotiations on what limitations are to be placed, with bearing the IAEA in point.
Okay.
Now,
just stay with me. Let me quickly take Stephen before the end of this program. Stephen, your last words, your last thoughts on this, being the Washington insider, what Pakistan has to do now.
You know, again, I think a Biden presidency, which again, I think it's more likely than not at this point. I'm actually looking at the numbers here, and it seems to be slowly kind of shifting in that direction. I think that a Biden presidency is going to give a lot of opportunities to Pakistan, because you are going to have a lot of very seasoned foreign policy people that understand the region quite well, and that they understand that there needs to be a balance between India and Pakistan. That's been the U.S. policy for a long time. Mr. Modi was able to sort of appeal to President's showmanship and get him sort of moving in a different direction, offering big crowds and things like that. I think that we're going to see a more normalized foreign policy from the Biden administration, more traditional, I would say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stephen in Houston, Adil Najm in Boston, and Najmuddin Sheikh Saab in Karachi. Thank you so much for this discussion. I leave all the judgment on you. Thank you so much.